Hello and welcome to Men Among Kings. I'm your host with the most, JJ.
And I'm Phil.
Today we're going to talk about It. Now, not the TV movie version of It from 1990, but the theatrical two-part It series.
2017.
Right. So, first and foremost, Phil, It is an enormous book.
Oh, it's a tome. It's huge. It's not Stephen King's longest novel, but
do you know what that is by any chance?
I believe it's The Stand, but the unabridged, uncut version is the longest. I could be wrong. Under the Dome is really long too. Yeah. It all depends on if you're looking at the hardcover paperback. You know, pages get a little bit different, but
sure. Well, and, I mean, technically, The Dark Tower is a series of books.
Oh, yeah.
So if you added those all together, but single book is probably the unedited Stand.
Yes.
Okay. So, the 1990 TV series of It left a huge impression, I think, on people. My dad and a neighbor watched the miniseries and then would call each other and talk about it. So it's no surprise that they went back to It for a theatrical version. And they really swung for the fences on this one. First thing I'm going to say is this movie was released in September of 2017.
It's like the dead zone for movies.
It's notorious for the worst garbage comes out in September. And that used to be also like the month of March used to be that. Then all of a sudden, you know, you get movies that come out like Marvel loves releasing stuff there. Disney's putting a lot of stuff into March. And so there are studios who are saying, listen, there's no such thing as a dead zone. You just need to find the right project. So when they first announced that we're not calling it It Chapter 1, right?
No,
even though the sequel is technically It Chapter 2?
Yeah.
Okay. So when It gets a September release, my first thought is this movie's going to bomb. And it turns out to be like earth-shattering as far as like records for theatrical releases in September. It makes a boatload of money. It gets people out to the theater who don't normally go see scary movies. I can think of our good friend Britta, who will not see scary movies, period.
No, she hates them.
But goes out and sees It on opening day.
Yeah. So
before we get too far into our dissection of It, give us a, give us a plot, but the plot of the movie, not of the book, because they are drastically different.
They are different, especially since this first movie. Let me put that on vibrate there. Especially since this first movie is half of the book, essentially. So, and we're talking just about the 2017 version of It. We'll probably touch a little bit on the TV movie, but that's for another episode. So, in October 1988, Bill Denbrough crafts a paper sailboat for Georgie, his 6-year-old brother. Georgie sails the boat along the rainy streets of small-town Derry, Maine, only to have it fall down a storm drain. As he attempts to retrieve it, Georgie sees a clown in the drain who introduces himself as Pennywise the Dancing Clown. Pennywise entices Georgie to come closer, then bites his arm off and drags him into the sewer. The following summer, Bill and his friends, Richie Tozier, Eddie Kasprak, and Stan Uris, run afoul of older bully Henry Bowers and his gang. Bill, still haunted by Georgie's disappearance, calculates that his brother's body may have washed up in a marshy wasteland called the Barrens. He recruits his friends to investigate, believing Georgie may still be alive. Ben Hanscom, one of Bill's new classmates, learns that the town has been plagued by unexplained tragedies and child disappearances for centuries. Targeted by Bowers' gang, Ben flees into the Barrens and meets Bill's group. They find the sneaker of a missing girl named Betty Ripsum, while a member of the Bowers gang, Patrick Hochstetter, is killed by Pennywise while searching the sewers for Ben. Beverly Marsh, a girl bullied over rumors of promiscuity, also joins the group. Both Bill and Ben develop feelings for her. Later, the group befriends orphan Mike Hanlon after defending him from Bowers. Each member of the group has encountered terrifying manifestations of the same menacing clown who attacked Georgie. A headless undead boy, a sink that spews blood only children can see, a diseased and rotting leper, a disturbing painting come to life, Mike's parents burning alive, and a frightening phantom of Georgie. Now calling themselves the Losers Club, they realize they are all being stalked by the same entity, which they refer to as It. They determine that It assumes the appearance of what they fear most, awakening every 27 years to feed on the children of Derry before returning to hibernation, and moves about by using the sewer lines, which all lead to an old stone well hidden under an abandoned house. After another attack by Pennywise, the group ventures to the house to confront It, only to be separated and terrorized. As Pennywise gloats to Bill about Georgie, the losers regroup and Beverly impales Pennywise through the head, forcing the clown to retreat. The group flees the house and begins to splinter, with only Bill and Beverly resolute in fighting It. Weeks later, after Beverly confronts and incapacitates her sexually abusive father, she's abducted by Pennywise. The Losers Club reassembles and travels back to the abandoned house to rescue her. Bowers, who has murdered his abusive father after being driven insane by It, attacks the group. Mike fights back and pushes Bowers down the well to his apparent death. The losers descend into the sewers and find It's underground lair, which contains a mountain of decayed circus props and children's belongings, around which the bodies of It's child victims float in midair. Beverly, now catatonic after being exposed to bright lights inside It's gaping mouth, is restored to consciousness when Ben kisses her. Bill encounters Georgie, but recognizes that he is It in disguise. As Pennywise, It takes Bill hostage, offering to spare the others and go into hibernation if they let It feed on Bill. The losers reject this, battling with It while overcoming their various fears. It is eventually defeated and retreats deeper into the sewers, with Bill declaring that It will starve during its hibernation. Finding the remnants of Georgie's raincoat, Bill finally comes to terms with his brother's death and is comforted by his friends. As summer ends, Beverly informs the group of a vision she had while catatonic, where she saw them fighting It again as adults. The losers swear a blood oath that they will return to Derry as adults if It returns. After the others make their goodbyes and disperse, Beverly and Bill discuss her leaving the next day to live with her aunt in Portland. Before she leaves, Bill reveals his feelings and they kiss.
Well, so the movie itself is filled with some really terrifying images.
Oh, yeah.
And the subject of fear is a big part of this, as well as I think, sort of the childhood trauma.
Oh, yeah.
Here's the one thing I don't understand about the town of Derry. Kids go missing on a pretty hefty, amount.
On a regular.
And they only mention the curfew once.
It's on a sign.
It's on a sign. It says, don't forget the curfew, 7 p.m.
Don't you think anybody would, research the town and go, there's a lot of children missing in this town. Why would they move there? Ben Hanscom is a new kid in town.
And even if you're the police force in this town, wouldn't you be questioning what's going on and saying gosh, kids shouldn't be going out at all. If I was a parent, I can't imagine I would ever let my kids go out, especially not out to swim in holes and sewer grates.
One of the great things about this movie is that it really focuses solely on the kids. Yeah, there's a couple adults here and there, but they're all kind of in passing, and none of them seem right.
Well, so let's break it down from the book to this movie. So this movie made this, and then the sequel made a choice to say we're going to show the kid's entire story first. We're going to tell the story in linear storytelling.
Yes.
Versus the book keeps going back and forth and back and forth.
It bounces back and forth. It starts out with the attack, both with Georgie and then in the future, which I'm not going to talk too much about because we'll get to that in another episode, but there's a specific attack that kicks it off. Georgie's the one that kicks it off back in the movie. It's 88?
Yeah.
And in the book, the biggest differentiation is the years. The book takes place in 57 and 58. Georgie disappears in 58. And then they come back in 84 and 85. Obviously, and it makes total sense that they want to update it. And if it originally takes place in 57 in this new movie, they'd have to go for 27 years, make it 84. Well, you don't necessarily want to make a period piece. You want to update it.
What I like is that you still do get that feeling of Americana, that 50s feeling, because the town of Derry, Maine is a kind of a sleepy little town. And so their movie theater looks like one of those grand old movie theaters with a big marquee.
But it also has plenty of eye winks towards the 80s, like the New Kids on the Block joke that pops up here and there.
And the music, the soundtrack, there's a lot more than just a score. There's an actual soundtrack to this movie. And little things like the marquee says, what movie's playing right now, Batman, and then Lethal Weapon 2, I think.
What I've read is that those movies didn't come out at the same time at all.
No, in fact, wasn't Batman 89?
Batman is 89.
So I find, is that just a wink and a nod to, what they liked as kids, or is there something specific with it?
And how big was Nightmare on Elm Street 5? Did that get a big theatrical? Would that have shown up in small town Derry?
Oh, absolutely.
You think so?
Think about, this is a time when the VHS boom was just sort of starting to hit, but those, it probably didn't open in Derry, but it probably made its way into Derry at some point. And this is also, remember, when movies would stay in theaters for like a month and a half, 2 months, true. Not like today when movies are in and out of screens, it seems like in a week.
Yeah.
But also they picked a time when cell phones, computers, you still were going to a library and digging through an actual book.
Yep.
So they didn't go far enough in the future. They could have set this thing in 1995.
Yeah.
But it would have been a drastically different movie had it been set in 1995.
Although making it in the 80s, also 27 years later, it's now.
Right.
Today.
It fits.
I feel, not to jump too far ahead, but they're totally going to do something with cell phones.
Oh, you got to think so.
Yeah.
The number 27 is really associated with the story. This film was released 27 years after the It miniseries in 1990. The release date is 9/8/2017. 9 plus 8 plus 2 plus 0 plus 1 plus 7, 27.
Wow.
It Chapter 2 released on 9/6/2019. 9 plus 6 plus 2 plus 0 plus 1 plus 9, 27. So
you got to think that they did that on purpose.
If not, what a wonderful coincidence.
I know. It's interesting because 27, obviously for it, is an important number, but generally for Stephen King books, the number 19 is the magic number.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah. So the fact that this is this book deals with 27 is really an offshoot from the norm of Stephen King.
The poster for this movie was Georgie standing in front of a red balloon with part of a clown's arm showing it off. Now, the Georgie scene is done within 10 minutes of the opening of this movie at most.
At most.
And Georgie, while Georgie comes back in a ghost-like figure several times, Georgie's not a big part. He's a motivating part, but he himself is not a big part of this movie.
That role. And that kid does it well.
Yeah. I got to tell you, I almost walked out of the theater when I first saw this movie because after Georgie gets his arm bit off by Pennywise the clown and he starts to go away and his little flipper, just like the shoulder socket right there, and he's bleeding into the street. That was almost too much for me to handle.
Wow.
It was. It took a lot.
The visuals, being able to do this rated R and on the big screen, you're able to show so much more than what they did for the TV movie.
Yeah. And people complain that the TV movie was a little too comical at times, like in its the effects kind of were
and
jokey.
The acting wasn't all that great either, but
and I think so they decided to take a different look at this. And so so let's talk about the acting first.
Please.
Which of the kids do you most identify with, Phil? Because I know which one I do.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I would probably I feel more like Ben Hanscom, probably.
So do I.
Really? I want to say Richie Tozier because he's funny and we're funny and everything like that, but I'm like, I know I'm a book nerd.
Richie is the guy who doesn't take anything seriously.
Yeah, that's true.
He's the character, and I love how they put Finn Wolfhard in those giant glasses, those very 80s-like glasses.
I knew he was from Stranger Things, but I don't see Mike from Stranger Things when he plays Richie.
No, and it's interesting because Stranger Things, I feel like, is the real reason this thing got its big shot in the arm, because this feels like the R-rated Stranger Things movie at times. We're so used to that band of kids taking on something that is beyond their level,
which
and for
they
him to be in both,
they pulled from it,
right?
Really.
So I mean, it's this wonderful cycle.
Yep.
I think Finn Wolfhard does a great job in this movie. You know, they've got a lot of those like your mom type jokes that go on,
which you can probably roll your eye and groan. He's the comic relief to lighten up a little bit of the awful mood. But there's some really funny parts in the movie too.
Oh, this movie does a wonderful job of showing you kind of the innocence of being a child, and that summer aspect of it too.
But yeah, I feel most like Ben.
Me too. So Ben Haskam is the chubby little guy who's in this, secretly in love with Beverly.
Too shy to really say anything.
But he sends her that postcard with the love note on it. I want to say this: Jeremy Ray Taylor, the kid who plays Ben, does something that is so brave, in my opinion. I'm proud to see him. He does that scene at the swimming hole where he's just in his underpants, and he's a portly little boy.
Oh yeah,
he's got man boobs. He is on screen almost naked.
Yep.
Very vulnerable and exposed for a long time in this movie. And what I really respect about that is, even if you were paying me $1 million, I would have felt at that age to be very self-conscious about what I was doing.
Oh, yeah.
It would have been very difficult for me to actually get through that.
I hear that.
Even thinking that as a 35-year-old, when I just rewatched the movie again recently, I was thinking, like, I couldn't do this.
Yeah.
I couldn't do, you want me to do a scene where I'm just in my underpants? I don't think I can do that.
I remember being a kid and not wanting to I would take my shirt off if I was swimming, but like just any normal everyday thing, like, oh, hey, we're just hanging out in the sun. I would never want my shirt off. And I wasn't necessarily a portly kid. I wasn't, a ripped, skinny kid, but I wasn't, a tubster.
Yeah,
no offense.
Yeah, you weren't shopping in the Husky department like
exactly.
Me. So Stanley is studying for his bar mitzvah.
Yep.
There's that scene where his dad, who's the rabbi, says, what are they going to think when the son of the rabbi? I want to say, this seems like a small town. How many Jewish people are actually in this town?
Yeah.
Because
New England, maybe more than you think, but
right. But I mean,
still,
Derry seems like it's a population of like 600 people tops.
Yeah.
Right?
Probably more like
and he's the only Jewish kid of his friends. It's not like
true.
two of them.
Although Richie shows up at the bar mitzvah, or at the, is that what it's called? The actual ceremony when you're.
Well, the bar mitzvah, like, and the party and stuff. But he shows up to the synagogue.
Yeah, to the synagogue.
For the
so
reading.
Makes you wonder if Richie's supposed to be Jewish too.
No, because Richie's asking questions about it.
Okay,
and so if he is, he's certainly not practicing.
So he's probably just there to support his
right.
friend.
And I think that's the thing is I've been to 2 bar mitzvahs, so I'm a Presbyterian by just paperwork alone. That's it.
Sure.
So I think that he is the one character that shows the most fear, and there's a reason for that. And that plays into chapter 2, I'm going to assume. I'm going to take some assumptions here that they're setting up something that's going to happen later on.
I feel like most people who are watching these movies have seen the TV version.
But you don't know necessarily.
But you don't know.
Because my wife just watched the first It with me the other day.
Had she seen the...
She says she's seen clips of it, but she doesn't remember sitting down and watching it. I mean,
so
we would have been 7 years old when that came out.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, I've watched it, but I didn't have friends, and I wore sweatpants, and I was, as you said, a chubster.
Yeah.
Tubster. So I spent a lot of my time in front of a VHS player as a kid.
So then she'll get a big shock.
Right. And, I mean, the character of Stan is interesting. I find his fear to be the scariest of all of them, the flute lady.
Yeah.
That... It's a painting in his dad's office that he just doesn't like to look at, and he also volunteers to stay guard and like watch out for stuff. So you get the sense that he is the least adventurous of all of them. Although Eddie, who has
hypochondria,
it's a Munchausen by proxy, right? Like his mom is the one who keeps telling him he's sick, he's sick, he's sick.
She's the one that's really instigating his hypochondria. He's hypochondriac too, but because of her.
Right, because he legitimately thinks that he's sick. He thinks, I need this inhaler, I need these pills. It's a weird situation because the pharmacist is in on it, like is giving him fake pills. Yeah. I don't feel like you could do that nowadays. I feel like that's not so good. Side note, there's a scene where they have to steal some goods and Beverly helps them. And it is one of the most uncomfortable scenes in this whole movie. And it does not involve a killer clown.
Nope.
It involves a pedophilic sort of pharmacist who is flirting with
Beverly.
How old are they supposed to be? Like 13?
Yeah.
Flirting with a 13-year-old girl.
Mm-hmm.
And like pretty brazenly. I was waiting for that moment where he was going to like graze and touch her hand.
But that's something about this movie where every adult, especially in this movie, every adult is not right. Beverly's dad is just not right. Even looking at Henry Bowers' dad, he's a bully.
Yep.
And is just a mean dad. And like no adult in this movie of it is right.
Do they flesh that out even further in the book about how like dairy makes people sour?
Yes, yes and no. There are some good people. There are some good adults in the book. Officer Nell is a character that did show up briefly in the TV movie. Doesn't show up at all in this movie, but he has a small part in it where he's the adult cop, and he warns the kids, hey, kids are missing, right? And it's like he's like the only real adult in the book that is concerned and worried. Honestly worried, not just like Eddie's mom worried. That he's like, he knows that there's nothing that he could do about it. So he's like, he tells the kids, if you're all together, if you're going to come down to the Barrens, because that's one other thing different in this movie and the book. They regularly go to the Barrens in the book. It's like they're only in the Barrens in the movie to look for Georgie.
And the Barrens being the
marshy area that's just on the outskirts of town.
Where the sewer dumps out into.
Yeah, pretty much. And that was their hangout in the book. And Officer Nell saw them down there, and he's like, hey, guys, if you're going to come down here, don't be alone. You'll be fine if you're together, but don't be alone. Because even though he is a good adult, he knows that there's something that's not right.
As we said, Eddie, has got this, he constantly has his inhaler. I think the one thing I like about Eddie is the one who really stands up to adults more than any other person, in this cast, with the exception of Beverly, who finally stops her dad from the abuse.
But that's also a fight or flight type response on her part, whereas Eddie
just calls out his mom. Also, for a movie that did so many things right with visual effects and costuming, it looks like they just shoved a pillow underneath this woman's house coat, because the fat suit that Eddie's mom is supposed to be in is just atrocious.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they were going for something with that, but like I've seen obese people and obese parents, and they don't look like they've just got this giant barrel chest.
What if she's not in a fat suit? You really just called out that actress.
She's got to be. She absolutely has to be, because I saw the way that she was walking in it, and being somebody who's
portly.
What was your term?
Tubster.
A tubster. I see how I walk, and I see the impression of how when people think like how like a larger person walks, and that's what she was giving me. It was like this larger person like walk. So, and that was one part that I don't think Eddie's mother really got got to the point of where it needed to be. I like the relationship. I like the way Eddie's house is set up, where she's constantly watching TV, but I don't think that they got her right.
Yeah.
I think there's a little that they could have been left to do.
Frankly, looking at the kids and acting wise, I think the only I personally think Stan is the weak link on the acting. He does a great job in Fear and everything like that, but there's one scene when they're about to go up into Beverly's apartment, and Richie is left down, and he goes, "Well, what if she comes back?" And Stan goes, "Do what you always do, talk." And the delivery of that line was just like, ugh.
Yeah,
just a little cringy, but
he should.
But that's the only real weak part is right there.
Stan should have been meek every moment. Like that's his thing. Is he's a meek man, boy.
Yeah.
The character of Mike, you're introduced to in a very like visceral way. He's working at his grandparents' farm, and you find out Mike's parents are dead.
Yep.
And that he's living with his grandparents, and he's got to pull his weight. He is killing lambs they've got like a little bolt gun that they're using to kill the lambs.
CO2 charges.
And the next time you see Mike, he's delivering this meat to one of the meat markets, and he's the first one who has a vision
in the movie.
Yeah, and his vision is of these charred hands coming out of like the smokehouse that he's delivering this meat to, and you find out later on that his parents had died in a house fire where they were trying to save him, and so he has this guilt built up, and I mean, that is a scary moment, and he's by himself. He's already freaked out because he has to avoid Henry Bowers, because Henry Bowers is not only a bully, it turns out he's a bigot as well.
Yeah.
They created such a loathsome, hateful character out of Henry Bowers. At one point, Henry Bowers, as a bully, is going to try and shoot a cat, which he's going to have his friend hold the cat.
Yeah.
And he's going to shoot it. He grabs Ben, and not only does he beat up Ben, but he carves the letter H. And he's going to carve the whole name into this kid's stomach.
And that's directly from the book.
Oof. It's hard to watch.
Yeah.
It's incredibly hard to watch.
So he's not just a bigot for like African American people, but he just for people that are not him.
Right. It's weird. He also rocks a mullet like there's no tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. Just
Henry
like
Bowers.
In the 80s. It's a great adaptation of the character because he's in the book he's kind of a greaser in the 50s, and so in the 80s he's that kind of like that kid in Terminator 2, the one who's also in Salute Your Shorts. You know, the mullet, and he just looks like a bully.
The character of Bill is really the one that we are experiencing most of this through. So because it starts with his younger brother, and really the desire to go into the sewer is led from Bill.
Yeah. I think, frankly, in my opinion, I think they downplayed a little bit of his stutter. I mean, he stutters, but it's kind of semi-imperceptible.
You can forget about it sometimes.
It's easily forgettable. In the book, it's way more pronounced and got worse after Georgie disappeared.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Another situation is Bill has a run-in with his dad where he's taken all of these hamster tubes and shows how Georgie's body, if it had gotten sucked into the drain, could have ended up in all these spots. And so the parents at this point, you get the feeling, have given up searching for Georgie.
Yeah.
And now is just the time when they're focusing on trying to move on and become better people. Or trying to get rid of that grief.
Yeah.
And then the last part of the Losers Club is Beverly Marsh. Beverly in this, you immediately you find out that she is a loner. There's a rumor going around town that she's promiscuous, even at 13. And they pick on her too.
Oh, yeah.
And it's funny because she's not a part of the group itself until she's summer vacation kickstarts. And of course Ben is the first interaction you see her have, and that's where he falls in love with her, is just some simple kindness that she shares with him, and you can tell he's a loner. She is one of the most complex characters in this because you don't see her be physically abused, as far as like, you don't know if her dad's beating her, but you definitely get the feeling that her dad is molesting her.
Yeah.
At one point.
In some way or other.
Way. At one point, he's going through her underwear drawer.
Yeah.
This is
you don't see it, but
right. He
references.
He says, "Why would you need to keep this hidden in your underwear drawer? Your underwear drawer."
Yeah, which means he's digging through her underwear drawer.
Beverly's mom is not a part of the picture in this.
Nope.
The apartment that they share, they do a really good job lighting it, where there's a lot of dark corners, and I feel like that's sort of how this dad is getting through life. He's got dark corners where he hides in, where he can do unthinkable things to his daughter. The one of the scenes where you find out that Pennywise is for sure just going after children is they have just an ocean of blood come spewing out of the bathroom sink in Beverly's house. And Beverly screams, her dad comes in, and her dad does not see any of it. But that blood remains there. It's not like it just disappears. It remains there, and then the losers all come and help her clean it up.
And that's, once again, that part is directly from the book, the blood in the sink coming out and everything like that. In the book, most of the original interactions that everybody's had with it is different in the book, but that one is spot on. And it's not just Bev's dad that doesn't see blood. No adult does see any of the things that the other kids do.
Interesting.
Which really, and it's not to say that it won't go after adults, but as an adult, you are naturally afraid of less, and you're skeptical.
And we get the feeling, or we are told that it feeds on fear.
Yeah.
This creature comes out every 27 years to feed, and that fear, it's weird because it feeds on fear, but it also actually kills.
Yeah.
And is that because you're the most afraid at death?
In the
do you think?
Book, there's a part in the book where Stephen King writes as it, and it's described that fear is like seasoning. So like you throw a steak on the grill, yeah, it's good, it's nourishing, but unless you season it, it's not going to be like, oh, that's delicious. So the way that it's described in the book is that the fear is like makes it more nourishing and more delicious. So he could just eat something or somebody, but the fear is what really helps, makes it better.
So let's talk about making something better. Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise, the dancing clown.
Yeah, please.
Pennywise, wow. You know, we're all aware of Tim Curry from the TV movie, which I thought he did an interesting job in that. This, they take it sort of like this commedia dell'arte clown type look, and so he looks out of place no matter what.
Yeah.
I found him to be terrifying in this. He really only has like 3 minutes of dialogue in this entire thing, and most of the time he's staring at kids. That kind of dead eye stare that gets into your soul, and the fact that he, are you thinking that he's projecting these things that are terrifying to the kids, or that he's morphing himself into the woman with the flute woman from the painting, and he's morphing himself into this creature with a bunch of burned hands?
It's probably a little bit of a combination of both, because legitimately, like its true form in the book is different than it's more of an ethereal type creature,
right?
But yeah, I agree. When this movie was coming out, when I heard that it is being remade, I was like, are they going to get Tim Curry? They got to get Tim Curry, but he's too old. What are they going to do? And so when
Tim Curry's had a stroke at this point and is in a
when Bill
wheelchair.
Skarsgård was, hey, he's going to be, I was like, who the hell is this guy? And then the first visuals that were released, I was like, ooh, yeah, that looks creepy.
I think the scariest part when I think of him is when Beverly is in the sewer, in that weird area of the sewer where it's a like a giant catch pot that's got a skylight in it.
The standpipe.
The standpipe?
That's what it's supposed to be.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah.
There's a moment where she kind of looks, and it's sort of this like old calliope, fair music, and his body is dancing and gyrating behind it with like flames, but his head stays perfectly still while he's looking at it. A little piece of trivia: there's a scene when he's attacking Eddie in the house, and he comes out of the refrigerator. What they did was they reversed. They had Bill Skarsgård and they put him like in a green screen suit, and so you just saw his head, and then they animated like through both physical manipulation as well as like CGI the rest of his body, so it would have this realistic yet unreal look at the same time.
Cool.
And that sequence is freaky too, because he's contorting himself out of the ice box.
The whole sequence in the house at Neibolt Street was great. And, once again, even though it's not a perfect adaptation of the book, the things that they change are spot on. They are worthy of the changes that they made.
This is another example, too, where we talk about Stephen King knows how to write children.
Oh, yeah.
He, like, the fear he must have faced as a kid doing whatever activity it was that freaked him out as a kid, but he really nails this one right here. I think it's really, really good. So
let's talk about I've already kind of mentioned a little bit, but some of the changes from the book to the screen.
Sure.
And some of the changes I've already kind of mentioned earlier in the podcast, but I'll kind of go through some of those again anyway. First of all, the book jumps back and forth between 57 and 58. That's the biggest discrepancy, is that the years are different, obviously. Georgie is left to die in the gutter. He doesn't disappear in the book. His arm is just ripped from its socket, and he dies right there. So there's no question whether he died or not. In the movie, they just kind of like search the Barrens. That's their hideout. That's their place where they gather, and that's a big chunk of the book is them in the Barrens. Their first encounter with it is totally different, except for Beverly. Beverly's is spot on the same.
The bathroom sequence.
Yeah, the bathroom sequence, the blood in the face.
So their individual ones are different in the book.
Individual ones.
Eddie doesn't interact with the leper.
That's the only other one. Excuse me, I said only Beverly was. But in the book, yeah, the leper is like, hey, I'll give you a blowjob, and chasing Eddie and everything like that.
It's weird because we don't get one for every single kid, right? In this, like, what's the one for Richie?
Richie's the only one in the movie that doesn't get one. In the book, he sees a werewolf.
That's what I'm saying is like it's kind of weird that they decided to pick and choose.
Yeah.
Which of these kids? Because Ben gets it in the library.
The library with
Mike
the kid.
sees the hands.
Yep. In the book, Ben sees a mummy, and that's his thing that it takes a form as. Eddie has the leper. Bill sees Georgie's ghost in a book. Richie sees a werewolf in the theater. Stan, instead of that creepy ass
the flute lady
sees two drowned boys in the standpipe, kind of like a big old cistern, and they're like chasing after him. I already said Beverly gets blood in the bathroom. Mike is significantly different. His is a flesh-eating bird that chases him.
Oof.
Yeah. Another big discrepancy between the two. In the movie, Ben has all this information about it, and in the past, in the book, it's Mike who has all this information. There's some hanging out that they do in the book that they don't show in the movie itself.
They have more interactions with Henry Bowers too, don't they?
A little bit. It's like almost everybody has kind of a run-in with him also, but not on their own. So it's like the only one that really does have a run-in is Ben, and that's right at the beginning when he carves the H in the gut. And in the book, it's Henry Bowers is a bully to everybody. But he really focuses on the losers because they actually start to stand up to him. It starts off with Ben, kicking Henry in the balls and then running away from him. So he really gets a target. And then because he hangs out with the others, everybody becomes like a huge target.
What about adults in Derry in the book versus this? Do they get more interactions with the adults, or do the adults kind of have some kind of a fog over them? Because that's what I take. Derry kind of lulls you down. It's almost like you just took a swig of NyQuil, and that's what's like living in Derry.
In a way, it really does. And we kind of mentioned it before, but there's really only one adult that's like, hey, there's something wrong, Officer Nell. And he's completely cut out of the movie. But yeah, all adults are they're in the book, they're still kind of off. And they make mention of it too, where like they don't believe, they lose that innocence, and so they don't see it.
What about Bill's bike?
Yeah,
is
Silver
is a big part of the book.
It's a huge part of them as kids. They're always biking around and everything like that. And Silver is his thing that he has.
And
that's like the only thing that he doesn't stutter. I feel like in the movie he doesn't stutter a whole lot. I already mentioned that, I think. In the book it's bad, but the one thing that he can always say is hi-ho Silver away.
Do you think that maybe Stephen King just had a bad typewriter and like it just got stuck?
Oh, yeah, maybe that's how it started.
That's how Bill got that.
He also has a little rhyme that his parents told him. He thrusts his fists against the posts and still insists he sees the ghosts. And he does say it in the movie, but it's more of just hey, he just happens to be saying it at some point.
What about when the kids interact with it in the battle sequence?
That's actually in the movie. There's two sequences. Yep. One, they just go interact with it on the house on Neibold Street, and that was pretty accurate. The big difference there is instead of grabbing a bunch of, they just go and grab. They prepare. They feel that, hey, Silver kills monsters. So Ben has $2 silver. They melt them down and make silver slugs. And Beverly is the best one at using slingshot, so she gets the slingshot. They go into the house, they kind of get separated, and they have a bad experience. And yeah, they almost get killed by it, but the silver doesn't kill it. It wounds it, and it does flee, but it doesn't kill it. And they're like, what are we going to do?
Does it hurt it because they believe it'll hurt it? Is that...
Yeah.
I mean, are we playing into the power of imagination here?
A little bit, yeah, definitely. In the movie, Eddie breaks his arm there at the house. Henry actually breaks Eddie's arm in the book.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So yeah, the silver slugs don't hurt it. Eventually, what they do is they, as kids, they create this Native American smoke hole to kind of like learn about it because they read stuff about it, and so they smoke it up, kind of. They're in this smoke hole, and it's a sweat tent, basically. Okay. And Mike and Richie, they have a vision of how it comes down to Earth, and it's like on an asteroid type thing. But like I said before, there's a chapter, or there's a section where it's through the voice of it, essentially. And it lives in the macroverse. It's like on kind of almost a different plane of existence.
And you don't get any of that in this first one.
None of that.
In fact, I mean, we might as well have it just, say like, oh, well, there was a graveyard full of pioneers and we moved the graves, or the headstones, but not the graves, treat it kind of like Poltergeist.
Yeah.
There's nothing to me that suggests that this is outer space.
Yeah.
Supernatural, yes, but not from outer space.
But it's also kind of described it's not just like, he's not just an alien. He's like a dimensional being.
Interesting.
Yep. And so the second time they go to interact with it, it's not on purpose. It's an accident. They get chased by Henry and his gang. One other thing that I'll mention, Patrick Hockstetter dies totally differently in the book.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he comes on to When it's just him and Henry, he comes on to Henry and offers to give him a blowjob.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then Henry, punches him, and then Beverly sees all of this. She sees this happen. Patrick goes over to an old abandoned fridge where he kills animals, opens it up, and there's these blood-sucking leeches that just fly out at him and just devour him alive.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty horrific.
Yeah. And then Beverly goes to get the group, and oh my goodness, he's gone, and they open it, and it's like it talking to him. Yeah. So anyway, they get chased down, and that's where they perform this ritual of Chud, or I don't know exactly how you're supposed to pronounce it. And so they enter the Macroverse, or Bill enters the Macroverse through this ritual, and he encounters this celestial being called Maturin, who's like this giant turtle. And Maturin says that you have to battle it through like the power of will. And so, I don't know, it's a little weird.
So what you're saying is that they take some pretty drastic measures to change what we're seeing in this.
Yeah. And it comes across okay on the screen because, it is kind of a battle of wills because they stop being afraid in the movie and attack it, and their willpower is actually attacking it. Even when, Bill has that gun and Mike says it's empty, there's no more. And, he believes that it's going to hurt it, and he pulls the trigger, and it does.
Interesting.
So the willpower is what really kills it.
I find that to be very intriguing because, I mean, obviously we're talking about a book that could have been 10 movies.
Oh, yeah. It's huge.
With the length of it. And because it goes back and forth, I love the choice that they decided to do the kid's story first, and then we'll have a time jump when we get to the next one.
Because in the book, they perform the ritual of Chud at the same time. As adults and as kids. The last thing that's really different in the kids section is after they defeat it, they're trying to get out of the sewers and they get lost. They have no idea where they are. And to kind of bring the group back together, to bring unity back to the group, Beverly has sex with them all. Which
it's sort of an idea of like to lose innocence,
it's
right?
Their loss of childhood,
and bond together.
Yeah. And that's kind of symbolic of their loss of their childhood. Their childhood is over. And
we were all thinking the same thing. We were all thinking when we watched this movie, like, are they going to have that weird sewer orgy scene?
Yep. And I'm kind of glad they didn't put in there because I don't think it would have been taken that way as it's described in the book. People were weirded out about it anyway in the book, but you can at least, like, the way that he describes it, it's, to bring them together and unity and everything like that. Whereas in a movie, it would just look like a gangbang.
Right, and that's the thing, and it sexualizes the children. And,
exactly.
And there's already a lot of overt tones. The fact that Beverly buys her feminine products for the first time, and then her bathroom gets flooded with blood.
Yep.
Like there are little things like that. I like that they do the blood oath. I think it fits.
And
it's a good way rather than having a sewer orgy.
Yeah, that's exactly the same. Oh. Henry Bowers just gets lost in the sewers too. He's not like pushed into the well. His friends get attacked by it, die, and Henry flees and is just lost in the sewers. They do make mention, granted this kind of moves into potentially the second movie. I guess I don't know yet. But he gets lost in the sewers and he's not like pushed and supposedly killed. He just flees and he gets blamed for all the child murders. So. And especially since Henry kills his dad in the book, too. That was similar.
Interesting. And, like, in this, we just see him fall down that pit.
Yeah.
And then they never wrap up the Henry Bowers storyline.
Yep.
So I assume that he's dead.
Yeah. And most people would because that fall just looks awful.
Right. But it's also, like, Henry Bowers plays big into the adult side of it, too.
In the book later, yeah.
So, you kind of think, like, okay, well, what are the... these are all changes, but if they're going to get rid of that, I mean, let's face it, we didn't see any giant turtle pieces, although
Yeah.
they do sprinkle in turtle references.
Tons of it. Like when Georgie's running down the street, there's a big mound and it looks kind of like a turtle. There's a Lego
building
turtle.
turtles. Yeah, turtles all Lego.
When they're swimming in the not creek, but in the
quarry,
the
like
quarry.
the rock
Yep,
quarry.
they're swimming in the quarry. They're like, "Hey, a turtle!"
Right. So turtles are a piece of symbolism
Yeah,
for this
which
as well.
Since they didn't actually have a giant celestial turtle in the movie, I'm assuming it's kind of like a wink, wink. If you read the book, like, "Hey, there's turtles around here. Maybe it's the good," because the turtle is like the same as it, only good instead of evil.
Do you think people were surprised that they didn't get a cameo by Stephen King or Tim Curry, who's, he's in a bad way right now after, he's ailing physically?
Probably a little bit, but I feel like it's been a while since Stephen King has popped up in a movie of his as a cameo. Stan Lee kind of took over for the whole, "Hey, I'm in this movie." So I think most people... Some people who are familiar with the 80s Stephen King would have been like, "Oh, it would have been cool to see him," but I don't think it's expected anymore.
I think one aspect of this is the miniseries is so iconic.
Yeah.
And
the miniseries is very close to the book.
And so I think people were expecting them to pay homage to the miniseries. And so whether or not we were going to see, some of the actors or actresses from that have a role in this.
Mm-hmm.
But I do like the fact that they're separating them out. These are two different entities. Now, we should also throw this out there. This is the highest grossing horror film of all time, one of the highest grossing R-rated movies of all time.
Highest grossing Stephen King?
I believe absolutely.
Yeah.
One thing that kind of is mesmerizing about this is when they went into production, they didn't immediately say we're going to do 2 parts. I think Warner Brothers was very scared. We talked about this being released in September, which is usually just a dumping ground for movies. So it is surprising to me that we had to wait 2 years for a sequel.
Yeah.
Because you would have thought that they'd be doing these things both at the same time, but I don't think the intention was ever there to do a sequel immediately. They wanted to see how this one was going to breathe.
Really, it got the success that it did because it was so good, but I think even with the September date and everything, I think it would have made a decent amount of money just being what it is, because most people are familiar with the story of it, whether it's from the book or from pop culture references or from watching the TV series.
Do you think it was tempting for them to say, well, let's make this a PG-13 movie? Because really, you're talking about a movie about kids.
Yeah.
So you think of all the kids who are watching Stranger Things at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And say, like, you're cutting out a huge swath of the audience.
I think that... I feel like when they pitched it, they probably said, "We're going to make this R because it is supposed to be horrifying, and we already did PG-13 with the TV movie. If you want to make another TV movie, make another TV movie. This movie is going to be R." So I feel like they probably didn't even question whether they should make it R. And then with the success of Deadpool and Logan, I think that they were probably like, "Okay, well, we'll make it R."
One last thing I want to make sure we kind of comment on a little bit about here too, is the fact that the movies are, and it's a hard R.
Yeah.
There's they're throwing a lot of curse words.
There's no nudity, but that's fine because kids are in it for the bulk of it.
The movie itself, I think, is meant to draw in people who are in their 30s and 40s.
Yeah. Who saw that TV series when they were kids.
Right. And who experienced that 1989, lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And now are the same age that the losers will be in the second one.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a pretty great choice that they made because
sure.
you're going to now be living, you're living vicariously. The first one hits you with nostalgia, and this one hits you with that sense of like, gosh, I forgot all these things throughout my childhood. I repressed everything that I don't want to think about. I can't remember years of my life that when I got bullied like in middle school that I just don't remember them at all.
Yeah.
And
there's a lot of stuff that I do remember, but there's so much more that I forgot that where somebody else might mention it and I was like, what? What are you talking about? I don't remember that.
There's great symbolism where they're all walking away from the final, like the blood oath moment where you're left with only Bill and Beverly.
Yeah.
They have their kiss.
I'm glad that in this movie they don't even touch at, hey, they're going to be adults and forget.
Right. But
spoiler alert, they forget.
that they're splitting though. The group is no longer intact because Beverly's going to go live with
in the book,
an aunt.
Yeah, in the book they even mentioned that the last time they are all 7 of them together is when they take that blood oath. Yeah, they're all in the same town. They all still hang out, but there's a time when they're all together except for Richie because he's out of town. They're all there except for Mike because he's busy. Like they're all still there and they all still hang out, but never again are all 7 of them together.
How does Stan go back and explain to his parents that he has puncture wounds on both sides of his face? In the end, he's wearing one of those things where it's like if you have an old-timey toothache and they tie that cloth above your head.
Yep. And they all... It's not, they did not just come out of this is like days later.
When they're out of the sewer?
Yeah.
No way. That's like the next morning. They're all wearing the same stuff that they were in the sewer.
No, they aren't.
Sure they are.
No, they aren't.
Aren't they?
Take a look again. They're wearing different stuff.
Oh.
Like Beverly
I suppose
is
because
wearing...
he gets out of the sewer and so he go... But I mean, still, how does he explain that?
Yeah, I know.
Do you go home to your parents and you're like, hey...
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. Beverly's wearing a dress, not that brown jumper that she was wearing before.
Yep.
But it just those are the weird loose ends that as a moviegoer I'm like, well, I'd like to see that interaction where he goes back to the rabbi's house and says, well, a giant clown tried to eat me. What were you doing?
Yeah.
Stop playing in the sewer.
You should know better. Kids go missing here.
Right. Well, okay. So Phil, as we wrap this up, the It 2017 theatrical version, yay or nay?
Absolutely yay. Like if you don't like horror movies, this is one that you probably want to miss. But if you are curious and you know anything about it, this is absolutely... If you like Stephen King, this is a must-see.
See, I disagree with you, Phil. I think that this is the type of movie where you don't need to know anything about Stephen King. You don't need to...
That's true.
You don't even need to like horror to get into this one because while it has scary moments... I feel it's closer in tone to like if Goonies was R-rated.
Sure.
The there's
friendship, the bond.
Elements. Exactly. It feels to me not like a standard horror movie, which is why I think it made so much money.
Yeah.
A lot of this movie takes place in the dark, but it's not the darkness that is frightening.
There's a lot of movies that, the people are haunted and everything like that, but... There's not as many that show that bond of friendship, like a true like character development and friendship bond that this does.
This movie had enough of an appeal that I remember going to see it with a friend of mine who hates horror movies. Yeah. She's terrified, doesn't like to think of them at all. And so she walked out of it with excitement enough that she's going to go see the sequel.
Yeah.
Now... Let's say the latest Child's Play movie comes out. She's never going to see that. She's never going to see a Killer Doll movie, not in a million years. But this has an appeal that goes beyond its own genre.
And really, they wrap up the movie in a way that if for some reason it tanked and they didn't want to do a second one,
they wouldn't have to.
They wouldn't have to. So they really gave themselves an out with the way that this movie was made, where they could have told the studio, hey, look, this is a movie. It is what it is. We plan to do a second one because it deserves a second one and it needs one for the book. But the studio could have gotten away with, this was a piece of crap. We don't want to do another one.
So long. And this thing was in development hell for so long. I mean, they've been talking about doing an It movie since right after the miniseries.
Yeah.
So it's no surprise that it took a long time to get here, but it obviously needed to, like a fine wine, this thing obviously needed to go through several script writers and different ideas where we have today. Well, we're going to cover It Chapter 2. I guess you don't even I wouldn't even call it a sequel. It's the continuation of this story.
It really is, because it's the same thing with like Mockingjay for the Hunger Games series.
It's part of a specific series.
Yeah.
You're not writing it in. There's not going to be new characters. They're not going to put a child in pair.
Probably better than the Harry Potter and all of those. This one, it was easy to make to 2 movies because there's 2 separate stories, 2 separate storylines that intermingle so perfectly.
Don't get me started with Harry Potter, Phil. All right. So Phil says yay. I also say yay. In fact, I say yay for those who are not even regular scary movie watchers.
Yeah.
All right. I'm your host with the most, JJ.
I'm Phil.
And this is Men Among Kings.